They don't tell you this part. They don't show it in the divorce celebration TikToks or the curated Instagram reels where she's holding a glass of wine with the caption, "Starting my second act." The modern world tells a divorced woman that her second act is a sexual awakening. They post the single and thriving photos, the girls' nights out, and the "I'm finally free" captions. It looks like a victory lap. It looks like empowerment. But if you look past the filters, there is a silent, darker transition happening behind the screen, a shift from seeking a partner to becoming addicted to attention. Today, we aren't talking about freedom. We're talking about why so many divorced wives end up in a cycle of promiscuity that they never intended to join. Think about the woman who was a wife for 10, 15 years. She had a structure, she had a name, she had a man who chose her every single day. But the moment those papers are signed, she enters a vacuum. Culture tells her to find herself, but the first place she looks isn't inward, it's outward, into the digital marketplace. And that's where the trap is set. She doesn't realize she's trading relational commitment for sexual access. She thinks she's winning because the door is open, but she doesn't see that the room she's entering is completely empty. But before we look at the mathematical lie that dating apps tell a 3-5-year-old woman, we have to talk about the anchor. Because when a woman loses her husband, she loses her psychological gravity and she'll do almost anything to stop the drifting. Now, before we go further, a quick favor. Most relationship channels beg you to subscribe for the algorithm. They want the numbers. I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'll say this. If you've ever watched a woman you deeply respected turn into a total stranger after a breakup, or if you've been confused by how someone can discard a decade of history for a month of novelty, then this channel was built for you. Don't subscribe for me, subscribe for future you. The version of you that refuses to be confused by this cycle again. The version of you that sees the game for exactly what it is. Now, let's get into the mechanics of the access versus options pivot. The access versus options paradox. Here is the reality that hits like a cold shower. After years of being seen by only one man, the sudden flood of dating app attention isn't just a change of pace, it's a literal drug. It's dopamine on demand. She opens her phone and sees 500 matches. In her mind, she sees 500 potential husbands. 500 men who find her attractive. 500 chances to be chosen again. But this is where the clinical observation becomes sobering. She is confusing access with options. Men will sleep with women they would never ever commit to. Men will flirt with women they would never build a life with. To the woman, a match is a connection. To the marketplace, a match is just a transaction waiting to happen. She thinks she has a line of suitors outside her door, but she's actually standing in a room full of tourists. They are there for the tour, not the residency. And because she is desperate to replace the emotional gravity she lost in her marriage, she begins to spend her psychological capital on these tourists. She starts trying harder, more provocative photos, more available energy, more openness to things she used to find beneath her. She tells herself she's experimenting or exploring her sexuality, but the truth is much more desperate. She is trying to anchor herself in the validation of new men to keep from drifting into the void of being alone. But there's a cost to this experimentation. Every time she spends her novelty on a man who has no intention of staying, she loses a piece of her ability to bond. And that is when the biological capital starts to hit a deficit. Let's get real for a second. There's a reason you see so many women hit 35, sign those papers, and suddenly start acting like they're 19 again. It's not just a midlife crisis. It's a frantic attempt to spend biological capital before the market closes. See, in a marriage, a woman's value is anchored in history. She's the mother of his kids, the one who navigated the lean years, the person who knows his coffee order and his deepest fears. That's relational equity. It's a high-value currency that isn't tied to a clock. But the moment she steps out of that structure and into the promiscuous phase, she's playing a completely different game. She's no longer trading on history, she's trading on novelty. And here is the cold, hard truth that modern culture tries to censor. Sexual novelty is a depreciating asset. Every time she enters a new situationship, every time she spends her vulnerability on a man who's only there for the weekend, she's spending her psychological capital. Think of it like a bank account. In her 20s, that account was full. She had time, she had low mileage, and she had a sense of wonder. But at 35, after a divorce, that account is already strained. If she spends what's left of her softness on a series of meaningless encounters, she's not exploring, she's bankrupting her ability to ever truly pair bond again. But it's not just her value that changes, it's her soul. Because to survive this cycle, she has to undergo a transformation that makes her almost unrecognizable to the men who once loved her. We call it the hardening. I want you to think about someone you know. Maybe it's a cousin, a former co-worker, or maybe even your own ex-wife. Remember how she was 5 years ago? Soft, patient, maybe a bit stressed but approachable. Now look at her social media today. The thirst traps, the sharp captions about not needing a man, the coldness in her eyes. That's not strength, that's armor. If you've seen this transformation happen in real time, drop a truth in the comments. I want to see how many of you have actually witnessed this hardening firsthand. Because once that wall goes up, the ready now phase becomes a total myth. The hardening, from softness to battle. When a woman is a wife, she has the luxury of being vulnerable. She has a protective shell provided by the marriage structure. But once she's in the promiscuous loop, she realizes very quickly that the men she's meeting aren't there to protect her. They are there to consume. To survive that, she has to become sharp. The defensive shift. She becomes assertive. She becomes bossy. She becomes hypercritical of every man she meets. The irony. She tells herself, I'm raising my standards, but in reality, she's just raising her walls. She becomes a high-maintenance version of herself because she's tired of being disappointed. But here's the kicker. High-value men, the kind of men who actually build legacies and protect women, they aren't looking for a battlefield. They are looking for a place of rest. When she shows up to a date with a warrior energy, she's unintentionally filtering for the exact men she claims to hate. The weak men who will tolerate her disrespect just for a chance to sleep with her. Or the players who are so used to the game that they don't care about her walls anyway. They'll just climb them, stay for a night, and leave before sunrise. And this is exactly where the ready now phase becomes a psychological trap. Because by the time she decides she's finally ready for a good man, she's already forgotten how to be the kind of woman a good man actually wants to stay with. Let's talk about the phone. That little glowing rectangle in her hand is the most dangerous weapon in this entire transition. When a woman leaves a marriage, she's usually starved for a specific kind of attention. She spent years as the wife, the mom, the person who handles the groceries. She feels invisible. Then she hits download. Within 48 hours, her phone is a biological slot machine. Ding. A doctor matches with her. Ding. A guy with a six-pack and a boat. Ding. A younger guy who says all the right things. In her mind, she's thinking, my ex-husband was holding me back. I have 500 men who want me. I'm a high-value woman. But here is the mathematical lie. She is confusing access with options. See, the digital marketplace has a very specific glitch. It gives a woman access to men who would never, ever commit to her. Men who are out of her league for a relationship will happily match with her for a weekend. Why? Because for a man at the top of the food chain, a divorced 3-5-year-old woman is low-stakes fun. She has her own place, she's experienced, and she's usually looking for validation. She thinks she's dating up. She thinks she's finally found the high-value man she deserves. But in reality, she's just a tourist destination for a man who is already living in a different city. But here's the scary part. When she spends 6 months being treated like a queen for a weekend by men who have zero intention of staying, she loses her ability to appreciate a king who actually wants to build. Think about it. If you've ever seen a woman get addicted to the apps, always checking her phone, always talking about the new guy who eventually ghosts her, you're watching a drug addiction in real time. She's chasing the high of being wanted, but she's forgotten the value of being chosen. If this sounds like someone you know, do me a favor. Just hit that like button right now. Not for me, but to signal to the algorithm that we need to get this message out to more men who are being gaslit by this empowerment narrative. The dopamine debt. Every time she goes on one of these promiscuous runs, she's taking out a loan from her future self. She's getting a massive hit of dopamine today, but she's paying for it with cynicism tomorrow. After 10 situationships that go nowhere, she doesn't blame the marketplace, she blames men. The generalization, all men are the same, men are intimidated by my success, modern men don't know how to lead. The reality, She's filtering for the 5% of men who are specifically designed to use her and leave. By the time she meets a good man, the guy who is stable, loyal, and ready to build, she's already burnt out. She looks at him and thinks he's boring. Why? Because he doesn't give her the anxiety spike that the players gave her. She's addicted to the chaos of the chase, and she mistakes that chaos for chemistry. She's now ready now, but her dopamine receptors are fried. She can't feel the quiet, steady love of a good man because she spent the last year screaming in a digital nightclub. But there's a final stage to this, a stage where the noise stops, the phone goes quiet, and the silent house starts talking. And that is when the ready now phase turns into a regret phase that most women take to the grave. Here's something they'll never tell you in a women's empowerment seminar. Femininity requires safety. For a woman to be soft, to be nurturing, to be that place of rest we all talk about, she has to feel anchored. In a marriage, even a flawed one, she has a protector. She has a structure. She can afford to let her guard down because the perimeter is handled. But the moment she enters the promiscuous phase, the perimeter is gone. She's out in the wild now, and the men she's meeting, they aren't there to protect her. They are there to consume. To survive that environment, she has to undergo a psychological mutation. She has to grow a shell. We call it the hardening. You've seen it. It's the change in the tone of her voice. It's the sharp, cynical edge in her jokes. It's the way she looks at every man like he's a predator or a disappointment before he even opens his mouth. She tells herself she's becoming strong and independent, but what's actually happening is she's becoming armored. But here's the tragedy of the shell. The same wall that keeps the bad guys out is the exact same wall that makes it impossible for a good guy to get in. Stop right here. I want you to think about the last time you met a woman who was fresh out of a divorce versus one who had been on the apps for 3 years. Do you notice the difference in the energy? One still has hope, the other has a list of demands. If you've ever sat across from a woman on a date and felt like you were being interviewed by a hostile HR manager instead of getting to know a partner, type interview in the comments right now. I want to see how many of you have felt that hardening firsthand. It's a vibe that kills attraction faster than anything else. The warrior paradox. This is the biological capital we talked about earlier. She's spending her softness to buy security. The defensive posture. She becomes hypercritical. She becomes bossy. She leads with her career, her achievements, and her standards. The mismatch. She's trying to impress high-value men with her boss babe energy. But here's the secret. A high-value man doesn't want another boss at home. He already has a board of directors, a staff, and a competitor list. When he comes home, he wants a sanctuary. By the time she decides she's finally ready now for a real man, she has forgotten how to be a sanctuary. She's been a warrior in the dating trenches for so long that she doesn't know how to put the sword down. She meets a solid, masculine man, and instead of leaning into him, she challenges him. She competes with him. She tests him until he gets tired and walks away. And then, what does she do? She goes back to her friends and says, "Men are intimidated by my strength." No, men are not intimidated by your strength. They are exhausted by your combativeness. But there's a stage after the hardening, a stage where the promiscuity stops being fun and starts being a chore. And that is when she enters the silent house phase, the part of the story that Instagram filters out. There comes a moment, usually on a Sunday night around 9 p.m, when the phone stops vibrating. The divorce high has evaporated. The new woman energy she spent 6 months cultivating has started to feel like a costume that doesn't fit anymore. She looks around her apartment, and for the first time since the papers were signed, the silence is loud. This is the phase no one posts about on Instagram. There are no hashtags for the silent house. See? Culture told her that promiscuity was a path to reclaiming her power. But power in the dating market isn't about how many men want to sleep with you. It's about how many men choose to stay with you. And after a year of situationships, friends with benefits, and low-stakes fun, she realizes she hasn't been empowered. She's been consumed. But here is the most painful part of the realization. She doesn't just miss her ex-husband. She misses the version of herself that was capable of trusting one person. I want to ask you a serious question. Have you ever seen a woman go through this? 1 month she's living her best life at brunch with the girls, and 6 months later she looks exhausted. Not physically tired, but soul tired, like she's been running a race that doesn't have a finish line. If you've seen that look in someone's eyes, that 1,000-yard stare of a woman who realized she traded a diamond for a handful of glitter, drop a reel in the comments. Let's talk about it, because this is the biological capital we mentioned earlier hitting a zero balance. The memory room. In this phase, she starts to do something dangerous. She starts to compare. The comparison trap. She looks at the guy she just spent the weekend with, the guy who hasn't texted her back, the guy who doesn't know her middle name, the guy who only sees her as a Tuesday night. The memory. And then she remembers the boring husband, the guy who knew her coffee order, the guy who held her hand when her dad died, the guy who was there. She starts to realize that the things she called suffocating in her marriage were actually anchors. And without an anchor, you don't just float, you drift until you're lost at sea. She tries to go back. She tries to find a good man again. But remember the hardening we talked about? She brings that armor into the room with her. She meets a stable, masculine man, but she's so burned by the promiscuous phase that she treats him like an enemy. She tests him. She's cynical. She's sharp. And the good man? He sees the baggage. He sees the war paint. And he quietly exits the room. But there's one final twist in this psychological trap. Because when the good men stop coming around, she doesn't blame the marketplace. She makes a choice that seals her fate forever. Let's have a real man-to-man moment here. We need to talk about the guy she thinks she's going to get after her wild phase is over. She calls him the high-value man. He's stable, he's fit, he's got his life together, and most importantly, he's a leader. She spends 2 years in the promiscuity loop, and then one morning she wakes up, looks in the mirror and says, "Okay, I'm ready now. I'm ready for my king." But here's the problem. She thinks she's been leveling up her experience, but the high-value man sees it as baggage. See, a man who has worked hard to build a life, a business, and a reputation isn't looking for a reformed party girl. He's looking for a partner. He's looking for someone who hasn't spent the last 24 months giving away her biological capital to every guy with a nice car and a Friday night opening. Mini cliffhanger. But it's not just about her past. It's about her vibe. Because by this point she has developed a high-value filter that actually repels the very men she wants. Think about the men you respect, the guys who are actually winning at life. Do they chase drama? Do they want to fix a woman who is emotionally hardened? No, they want peace. They want a woman who feels like home, not a woman who feels like a deposition. If you've ever met a woman who tried to sell you on her career and her independence while her energy felt like a cold winter morning, hit that like button. Let's see how many of us have walked away from a great-on-paper woman because her energy was just off. The reciprocity gap. This is where the promiscuous phase backfires. She's been treated like a queen for a night by players, so now she expects a king to treat her like a queen for a lifetime. The entitlement. She enters the room with a list of demands. He has to make this much. He has to do this. He has to handle my kids, my ex, and my trauma. The reality. The high-value man looks at her and asks one simple question. What do you bring to my peace? If her answer is, I'm a boss babe, or I'm independent, he's going to keep moving. Why? Because he can hire an assistant for that. He can't hire a soft, loyal woman. She doesn't realize that her promiscuity phase didn't just spend her beauty. It spent her agreeability. It spent her patience. It spent her ability to follow a man's lead. She spent so long handling it herself and playing the field that she's forgotten how to be a teammate. She's ready now, but the men she wants are ready for someone else. And this leads us to the final, most chilling stage of the cycle. The stage where the independent woman narrative finally breaks and the isolation begins. This is the silent house at 40. Here is the part the TikTok filters can't fix. There's a specific kind of silence that happens when a woman hits 40. The divorce high is a decade in the rearview mirror, and the promiscuous phase has officially run out of steam. She's not independent anymore. She's isolated. She's spent years telling herself that she doesn't need a man, but now she's sitting in a house that feels like a museum of her own past mistakes. She's got the career, she's got the girls' trips, she's got the social proof, but she doesn't have a witness. She doesn't have the one person who knows her soul. She realized too late that access was a lie and options were just a temporary distraction. But here's the most dangerous part for you, because when a woman in this phase realizes she's lost her anchor, she doesn't always go away quietly. She goes hunting for a rescue mission. I want you to be honest with yourself. Have you ever met a woman who suddenly found God or changed her ways after 10 years of chaos? And now she's looking for a stable man to pay for the emotional and sometimes financial debt of her past. If you've ever felt like a woman was trying to audition you to be the hero of a story she already ruined, type rescue in the comments. Let's see how many of us have been targeted by the I'm ready now trap. Tactical advice. How to navigate the ready now trap. If you find yourself sitting across from a woman who has spent her 30 seconds in this promiscuous loop, you need to be a surgeon, not a symptom. Here is how you navigate this without getting your life wrecked. Look for the hardening. Don't listen to her words. Listen to her energy. Is she soft? Is she receptive? Or is she sharp? If she's sharp, she hasn't healed from the marketplace yet. She will treat you like the enemy before you even order an appetizer. Run. The history test. Ask her about her longest relationship since the divorce. If it's a string of situationships that lasted 3 months each, she hasn't found herself. She's just been consumed. She doesn't know how to build. She only knows how to experience. Don't be the retirement plan. A lot of men feel honoured when a beautiful, experienced woman finally chooses them. But ask yourself, am I being chosen because of who I am, or am I being chosen because she's tired? There is a massive difference between a woman who wants you and a woman who just wants to stop running. Because the man who understands the biological capital of a woman never gets lost in the modern chaos. He knows that a ready-now woman is often just a run-out-of-options woman. The final future you outro. We've covered a lot today. We've looked at the social lie, the dopamine trap, and the silent house. This isn't about hate. It's about mapping the reality that culture tries to hide. If this video gave you clarity, if it made you feel less crazy for what you've seen in the real world, then you know what to do. Most channels want your sub for the clout. I want it so you can stay sovereign. Don't subscribe for me, subscribe for future you. The version of you that is too smart to be a rescue mission for a woman who spent her best years on the tourists. Wait, before you go, there's one specific thing a ready now woman says that is a 100% red flag. If you want to know what that secret sentence is, you need us to subscribe and stay tuned. See you on the next one.